Truth is often stranger and colder than fiction. Sometimes, the quiet moments reveal more than the loud confrontations ever could. The morning she changed the door code and told me the garage was no longer mine to use, I did not argue. I smiled, walked back to my car, and drove to the one place she could never touch the past. I had spent 31 years building. I had come home from the grocery store the way I always did on Thursdays. Arms full, keys ready. But when I punched in the 4 digits I had used for 11 years, the panel beeped twice and flashed red. I tried again. Red. I knocked because it felt right, though my mind had not yet caught up to what was happening. My daughter-in-law opened the door 6 inches, not enough to let me through. She wore my apron, the yellow one with embroidered sunflowers my sister had sent from Tennessee the Christmas before she passed. She said it calmly, the way people say things they have rehearsed. We changed it for security reasons. Marcus agrees. You have been leaving the garage door open at night, and it makes us nervous. I looked past her into the kitchen. The curtains I had sewn were still hanging. The table I refinished that summer in the backyard was still there. My refrigerator, my tile floor, my window above the sink. She had said. Marcus agrees. I asked her what the new code was. She tilted her head slightly. I think it is better if you ring the doorbell going forward. That way, we always know when someone is coming in. Someone? I was 66 years old, and I had been called someone in the house I purchased in 2003 with a down payment I saved for 9 years. I did not raise my voice. I did not let my hands shake where she could see them. I simply said, I see, and walked back to my car with the groceries still in my arms, my heart beating less like panic and more like recognition. This had been building for 3 years. I had simply refused to name it until now. I drove to the end of the block and parked under a magnolia tree, losing its blossoms in the October heat. I set the grocery bags on the passenger seat and sat very still for a long time. Her name was Trish. My son Marcus had brought her home 4 years ago, bright-eyed and certain, the way he always had been about things that later unraveled. They had married quickly, which I accepted. They asked to move in temporarily while their new construction home was being finished, which I accepted. Temporary became 6 months, then a year, then 2. Then, the word temporary quietly disappeared from every conversation, the way certain words do when the people using them no longer need them. In the first year, Trish had been careful, grateful even. She rearranged the pantry once and apologized twice. She asked, before painting the guest bathroom. She called me Beverly, which I preferred over Mom, and I appreciated that she did not pretend at closeness she did not feel. But something shifted after the second year. I noticed it in the small things first, the way she stopped asking and started deciding, the furniture she moved without mentioning, the friends she invited over who filled my living room on Friday evenings while I sat in my bedroom watching television with the volume low. Marcus said nothing. Marcus had always been the kind of man who believed silence was the same as harmony. I swallowed it the way women of a certain age learn to swallow things. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself family required patience. I told myself a great many things that were not entirely true. But she had changed the door code, and she had done it with his agreement. I reached into the glove compartment and found the small notebook I had kept there, the kind I carried for 31 years at Southeast Regional Title. I had started at the company as a filing clerk at 32 and retired as senior title officer at 63. In those 3 decades, I had reviewed thousands of property records. I had caught errors that saved families from losing their homes. I had also caught people trying to take what was not theirs. I opened the notebook and wrote one word: check. I drove to the county recorder's office before it closed. The woman at the counter recognized me. I had consulted there enough over the years that my face was familiar, even 2 years into retirement. She smiled and asked if I was doing volunteer work again. I smiled back and said, I was just looking something up for a friend. She waved me through to the public terminal without a second thought. I typed in my address, my name, and then I waited. The results loaded slowly, the way government systems always do, as though the information itself was reluctant. I scanned the transfer history, the liens, the recorded instruments. Everything moved in the orderly sequence I expected, until the last entry. Dated 14 months ago. Quit claim deed. Grantee Beverly Ann Whitmore and Marcus David Whitmore. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I had seen this before in other people's files, in other people's tragedies, and I had always wondered how it felt from the inside. Now I knew. It felt like standing in a room where all the furniture is exactly where you left it, but the walls have been moved 2 inches, and everything is just slightly, wrongly different. I had never signed a quitclaim deed. I had never authorized one. I had never agreed to add Marcus to my title, but someone had signed my name. I asked the clerk for a certified copy of the recorded instrument and paid the $7 fee without expression. I tucked it into my notebook. I drove back to the magnolia tree and sat there until the light changed. Then I called Carol Reeves. Carol and I had overlapped at Southeast Regional for 12 years before she left to open her own real estate law practice in Savannah. We were not close in the way of phone calls and birthday lunches. We were close in the way of shared competence, having sat across tables from each other in moments that required precision and honesty. When I told her what I had found, she did not gasp. She asked 2 questions. Is the notarization legitimate? And when did you last see your original deed? I did not know the answers yet, but I knew where to find them. That night, I stayed at my sister's old friend Patricia's house, which was now my standing invitation since Patricia had moved to assisted living and asked me to look after her cats. I had been giving that address to no one. I realize now I was glad I had somewhere to go. I lay on the narrow guest bed and stared at the ceiling, letting my mind do what it had been trained to do, not to feel first, to find first. By morning, I had a list. Carol met me at her office at 8. She reviewed the quitclaim deed and the notarization and said what I already suspected. The notary seal was registered to a woman named Deborah Foss, a mobile notary who worked primarily with mortgage companies. Carol made 2 calls. Deborah Foss had no record of visiting my address. Her log showed no appointment on that date. She was, Carol said carefully, very concerned about how her seal had been used. So it is forgery, I said. Carol set the document down. That is one word for it. We need the full picture before we use words. The full picture arrived that afternoon through a records pull. Carol ran herself. My home had a HELOC opened against it 18 months ago. Home equity line of credit, $110,000. The primary borrower was listed as Marcus David Whitmore, co-owner. The funds had been drawn in 3 withdrawals. I sat across from Carol's desk and thought about Trisha's boutique on 4th Street, the one selling handmade candles and linen items, struggling from the day it opened. I thought about the renovation to the studio she had done last spring, the new fixtures, the expanded back room. I thought about how Marcus had told me the business was doing well, almost turning a corner, just needing a little more time. I thought about the word temporary. Carol said, I want you to understand the scope of this before we decide how to proceed. I understand it, I said. He used my house as collateral for a loan he took out with a deed bearing my forged signature. The loan funded his wife's business, and now she is changing the door code. Carol looked at me steadily. Yes, that is what the paper says. I have spent 31 years reading what paper says. I said, let us proceed. We filed a complaint with the county recorder to flag the instrument. Carol contacted the lending institution to notify them of the disputed deed. She also drafted a notice of termination of consent to occupy, citing the fraudulent transfer as grounds for immediate revocation of permission. We prepared everything before Marcus knew I had found anything. I did not call him that night. I did not call Trish. I went back to Patricia's house, fed the cats, made myself a bowl of soup, and slept better than I had in 3 years. The notice was served on a Wednesday morning while I was having coffee at a diner on Price Street. My phone lit up with Marcus's name. He let it ring. It rang twice more in the following 4 minutes. Then Trish called from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized the Georgia area code. I did not answer that either. When I finally picked up for Marcus, his voice was not angry. It was frightened, which was worse. Mom, there is a man here with papers. I know, I said. What is this? What did you do? He said, we have to vacate. I set my coffee cup down. What did I do? I repeated. He was quiet for 3 seconds. I counted them. We can explain everything, he said. I want to hear it, I said. But not today. Today you read what was served to you. Trish's voice came through the background, sharp and fast. I could not make out the words, but I recognized the register, the voice of someone whose plan had arrived at its edge. Tell her, Marcus said presumably to Trish. Tell her it was just a formality to protect the house in case something happened. Protect it from whom? I asked. He did not answer. I ended the call and walked to the counter and ordered a piece of apple pie because I had earned it. The meeting happened 4 days later in Carol's conference room. I arrived first. I chose the chair with its back to the window, the one I always took at Southeast Regional, when a conversation demanded full visibility. Carol sat beside me with a folder thicker than Marcus would have expected. They arrived together, which told me Trish had coached him on the drive over. He wore a pressed shirt. She carried a leather planner. She opened and closed twice without writing anything. Their matching performance lasted approximately 4 minutes. Carol spoke first. She laid the quitclaim deed on the table. Beside it, she placed the notary log, showing no recorded appointment. Beside that, the Helolock documents and the 3 draw statements, totaling $110,000. Marcus looked at the papers and then at me. Mom, he said, it was to protect you. If something happened to you, I needed to act on the house quickly. Probate takes forever. You know that, I said. I know probate is the correct legal process. I also know that protection does not require forgery. Trish said, we did not forge anything. The notary was just unavailable to confirm because it was done remotely and her records are sometimes delayed. Carol said, remote notarization requires an audio-video session log filed with the state. There is no such log. The notary herself has filed a statement disavowing the signature. Trish opened and closed her planner again. Marcus leaned forward. The money was an investment in the business. It was always going to come back. I reached into my folder and placed a document on the table. It was a profit and loss summary Carol had obtained through the business filing records. The boutique had not turned a profit in any of its 3 operating years. The last filing showed a net loss of $44,000. Marcus stared at it. Trish would not look at it. I said, I want to understand something, and I want the truth, not a strategy. For 3 years while I lived in that house, did either of you intend to leave? Was there ever a construction home being finished somewhere? Silence. Marcus said quietly, it fell through early on. We thought we could save enough to buy something, and then the business needed capital, and it made sense at the time. It made sense, I said. Trish said, we are family. Families help each other. I looked at her for a long moment. I had worked with documents my entire career. I had learned to read signatures, spot inconsistencies, recognize when something had been altered. People are not entirely unlike documents. Over time, you can see what they have changed and what they have tried to hide. You changed the door code, I said. To my home, the week before this notice was served. Did Marcus ask you to do that? She said nothing. I looked at my son. Did you know she was going to do that? He looked at the table. I am going to ask you to leave the house within 30 days, I said. That is the legal notice period, and I am honoring it fully. I want no disruption to the property. I want my personal documents, which I will inventory before you vacate, to be untouched. I need Marcus to sign a release, acknowledging the quitclaim deed was recorded without my consent. Carol had explained that last part was necessary for the lender to begin unwinding the helilock. Without it, we would proceed through the fraud complaint, which would move more slowly and publicly. Marcus looked up at me. And the loan? The lender has been notified of the disputed deed. They are investigating. That process will run its course, whether or not you cooperate. What you can control is whether your name is attached to a fraud finding or a correction. Trish said, "You cannot take our home." I said, "It was never your home. Not one day in 3 years. The deed with your husband's name on it is fraudulent. When it is vacated, ownership reverts entirely to me. I have also spoken with the county recorder's office. They are involved now, not because I asked, but because a flagged instrument requires investigation. I did not bring the county into this. Your paperwork did." She stood up. "This is not what family does." I kept my voice level. What family does is tell the truth. What family does is ask before taking. What family does is not change the locks on the woman who let you live in her house for 3 years while you spent her equity on scented candles. I regretted that last part slightly. Carol pressed her lips together in a way that suggested she found it understandable. The meeting ended the way most difficult things end, not with resolution, but with the paperwork moving forward and the people involved retreating to wherever they go to reassemble their stories. Marcus stopped at the door. He did not look at Trish when he spoke. "I am sorry. Mom," he said it to the floor. "I know you are," I said. "Come find me when you mean it to my face." The 30 days passed, the way official time always does. Slower than you expect and faster than you are ready for. I did not stay away from my neighborhood. I drove past the house 3 times, not out of surveillance, but out of a need to remind myself it was still there. Still Mina. Still waiting. Carol called on day 22. The lender had accepted the fraud documentation. The helilock was being restructured pending the deed correction. The county was moving forward with a formal inquiry into the notarization. She told me it would likely result in a small settlement, nothing significant, but enough to cover some of what had been drawn. I thanked her and asked what I owed for her time. She said, "You caught it yourself. I just wrote the letters. Consider it professional courtesy." On day 30, I parked in front of the house at 2 p.m. The moving truck had been there that morning. A neighbor texted me. It was gone now. I sat for a few minutes before going in. The house looked the way houses look when people have left in a hurry, and with resentment, pale squares on the walls where their pictures had hung. Scuffs along the baseboard in the hallway. The yellow apron was gone. I assumed she had taken it, and I found I did not mind as much as I expected. Things can be replaced. I opened all the windows first. Then I walked through every room slowly, writing down what I saw in my notebook the way I had been trained to do. Methodical, factual, no editorializing. The damage was minor. The absence of certain things I had expected to find was more striking than what was broken. My filing cabinet in the study had been opened. Several folders had been moved. I went through them carefully and found that the original executed deed from my 2003 closing was missing. I was not surprised. I had photographed every document in that cabinet 3 weeks earlier and uploaded the images to a secure account. Carol managed. I noted the missing deed in my log, added it to the record, and moved on. I scrubbed the kitchen that afternoon and the bathrooms the next morning. I found a painter through a woman at my church who had used him twice. He came on Thursday, and I chose the color without any deliberation. Sage green, the color my mother had painted her kitchen in Memphis, and which I had spent years meaning to use somewhere. When the first coat was dry, I stood in the kitchen and made myself a proper meal for the first time in a week. Not because I had been unable to before, but because the act of cooking in that kitchen felt, for the first time in 3 years, entirely uncomplicated. No one would come through the door. I had not invited. No one would comment on what I had chosen to make or how I had chosen to season it. No one would use the good pan and leave it soaking. My phone buzzed while the rice was finishing. Marcus had been texting in small, careful increments since the move. Short messages. No explanations. Things like, "We got a place in December," or "I started looking into the loan situation." None of them asked for anything. This one said, "Can I come over sometime?" Not to argue, just to sit. I read it twice. Then I typed back, "Next Saturday, lunch." Ring the doorbell. He sent back a single word, "Okay." I understood something then that I had not been able to see clearly while I was inside the situation. I had not been angry at Marcus the way I had expected to be. The forgery, the deception, the 3 years of borrowed peace, all of it had weight. But what I kept returning to was not the crime. It was the smaller thing, the way he had said nothing when it mattered. When Trish had stood in front of me with my apron and her new code, and her casual appropriation of everything I had built, he had stood behind her and said nothing. That was what I had to decide whether I could forgive. Not the paperwork, not the silence. He came on Saturday and rang the bell, which was the right thing to do. He sat at my kitchen table and looked at the sage green walls and did not comment. I made sandwiches and we ate with the kind of quiet that comes before things that need saying. Trish is at her mother's, he said finally. I think permanently. I said nothing. She asked me to lie to you about the deed. She said it was just to protect our future and that you would never know. And I thought this is wrong, but maybe it will all work out before she finds out. So I did it. I signed your name because I thought I would fix it before it matters. You have spent a long time thinking things will fix themselves before they matter. I said. He looked at his sandwich. I know the business. I said, how much is left of it? He was quiet for a moment. She took most of what was in our account when she left. There is about $800, and the loan, the lender has been in contact. I have to figure out how to repay what was drawn. He paused. I know you are not going to help with that. I confirmed. I am not. He nodded as if he had expected exactly that and needed to hear it clearly anyway. I want you to understand something, I said. I am your mother in all the ways that matter. That does not change. But I am also a woman who owns this house and who spent 31 years knowing exactly how property works and how people use it against each other. I saw this happening earlier than you know. I chose patience over action for too long because I did not want to believe my son was participating in something dishonest. That was my mistake, and I am done making it. He said, I am sorry. Mom. And this time he looked at me when he said it. I know you are. I said, that is the beginning. We sat for another hour and talked about things that were not the forgery or Trish or the boutique on 4th Street. We talked about his job, which he still had. We talked about the apartment indicator, which had south-facing windows he seemed quietly pleased about. We talked about my mother's kitchen in Memphis, which he had never seen. And I described the color on the walls, and he said it made sense. When he left, he hugged me at the door. I held on for a moment longer than I might have a month ago. Not because everything was resolved, because some things are not resolved so much as they are accepted and moved forward from. I went back inside and locked the door with my key, not the code. The key I had carried since 2003, the one with the slightly worn grip where my thumb always rests. 3 weeks after that, I started hosting a monthly meeting in my dining room. Nothing formal, just women from the neighborhood, a few from my old church, 2 from my former office. Women who had lived long enough to accumulate the particular uncertainty that comes when children ask to be added to deeds, when sons-in-law begin offering to manage investments, when someone in your family suggests, it would just be easier if you let them handle the accounts. We drink coffee, and I bring out my notebook. Not to lecture, not to remind. The deed stays in your name until you decide otherwise. Decide. Not drift. There is a difference between generosity and surrender, and the line is clearer than people want you to believe. A will protects the ones you love after you are gone. A clear deed protects you while you are here. Those are two different documents serving two different purposes, and they should never be confused. The questions they bring me are quiet and serious. My son says it would be simpler. My daughter says she is just protecting me. My son-in-law offered to handle the paperwork. I have heard all of it before. In 31 years of title work, in my own dining room, in the face of my son at my kitchen table, while a woman in my apron stood between us and called me someone. I tell them what I know. Paper does not soften the truth the way voices do. A document is what was agreed to, not what was promised at dinner. And if you are ever unsure if something feels slightly, wrongly different, go to the county recorder. Ask to see your own file. It belongs to you. Every woman in that room has earned the right to know what is in her own file. A month ago, I found the original 2003 deed in a box in the garage. It had been tucked under a stack of old National Geographics, which was either careless or deliberate, and either way, no longer mattered. I filed it with Carol for safekeeping. I come home on Thursday evenings and park in my garage with the code I set myself. I keep it written in my notebook and nowhere else. The kitchen smells like whatever I decide to make. The television is at the volume I prefer. The chair by the back window is where I set my coffee in the morning and my tea in the evening, and no one reaches past me to adjust anything. I am not telling this story because I want sympathy. I am past the age where I need to be agreed with to feel real. I am telling it because somewhere right now there is a woman who has been called someone in her own house, who has smiled when she should have spoken, who has told herself, the silence is keeping the peace, when the silence is only keeping the lie comfortable. You built the thing you are sitting in. You signed the papers. You paid the price in money, in years. And in every small surrender that seemed too minor to resist at the time, you are allowed to look at what is yours and say clearly and without apology, this is mine. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. The house does not need to be a battleground. It just needs to be true. And if someone has moved the walls while you were not looking, you are allowed to go check the records. I have a notebook. I know where the county office is, and the door code is mine.